Welcome everybody to today's Raleigh City Council budget work session. Before we start with our agenda, just wanted to acknowledge the events of the last week, how heartbreaking and devastating this has been for our entire community. I also want to bring up a memo that City Manager Ruffin Hall sent to us before this session started. In it, he outlines action steps in response to the recent demonstration events. Couple of things very quickly. Actually conducting an events review report and ask to hire outside panel of experts to help us with an independent review and also objectively review our policies and procedures. The other item he notes is a council direction from June 2nd, where council member Stewart requested and council concurred that we get a report back on the Good Samaritan rule that requires officers who witness bad behavior to intervene. The 3 strikes rule, which makes sure that officers with a track record of complaints are tracked. Also, the type of force used against George Floyd knee to neck is not used in Raleigh. And a list of all training currently provided to the Raleigh Police Department. He also noted a council director from June 4th, where I had requested that that we look at Campaign Zero's 8 Can't Wait proposal and ask that this be brought before our Police Advisory Board for review. So what I would like to suggest is that we put this memo and the topics on here on our agenda for the work session tomorrow, and that we have this first. I would also like to request that the 8 Can't Wait items and the items from Councilor Stewart be presented to us as policy initiatives, so we can review those and hopefully move forward in approving. There is a sense of urgency here. So we will have this item on our agenda for the work session tomorrow. And now I'm going to ask Mary to come up and guide us through today's agenda.
Thank you, Mayor. Good afternoon, Mayor and members of council. So today is the first budget work session after the manager's presentation of the proposed budget. We'll go through a series of agenda items. There's only one formal presentation today, and that is on our stormwater management enterprise rates. The rest of the budget notes have been provided in the agenda as information for council as requested. So no action is required by council unless you direct us for inclusion in the budget, and then they will go in as addendums to our proposed budget. So to kick us off today, Wayne Miles from Engineering Services is going to come up and provide a presentation on some of the other options that were not included in the proposed fiscal year 21 budget.
Thank you very much, Mary. Appreciate it. My name is Wayne Miles. I'm the Stormwater Program Manager in the Engineering Services Department. As Mary mentioned, I will do a brief presentation in response to Mayor Pro Tem's request for additional information related to budget capital improvement options that were considered during our budget deliberations by the Stormwater Management Advisory Commission. Here's a brief review of the budget that I presented to you last time. Our proposed operating budget is $19.5 million. That's based on no increase to our current stormwater utility fee, which is set at $5 per single family equivalent unit. This budget does not include the capital improvement program, and I'll show that on slides in just a moment, and that is where the level of service options are proposed. Here's a bar chart to show how our proposed budget for this year compares to recent years. In this bar chart, the lower portion of the green bars are the operating portion of the budget. The blue bars are the capital improvements portion of the budget. And the FY21 proposed here is what I presented to you last time. The three additional bars to the right are the three level of service options that were considered by the Stormwater Management Advisory Commission during their deliberations. And as you may notice, for these options, the operating budget is proposed to stay constant. The only variable is in the capital improvements budget. Now, these smaller purple bars that you will note, that is a fund balance appropriation. As I mentioned last time, we are below our fiscal target on our fund balance. And so this year, we are proposing a fund balance, a reappropriation to restore that balance. And as the proposed budgets increase, that amount of that restoration would increase. So that's why the purple bars increase moving forward. Each of these proposals is associated with a different rate increase. The first is associated with a 50-cent increase, the second associated with a $1.50 increase, and the third associated with a $3 increase. And I'll go into more details here in just a moment. Here is a summary table of the different capital improvements program level service options. So the first column is the one I proposed previously with no rate increase. That would result in a $4.5 million capital improvements budget. And then the three various options that I will go through have different levels of each program associated and some new programs that were considered to be proposed under each of these different options. So option one, which corresponds to a 50-cent rate increase, there is an increase to the major infrastructure projects. We would be able to get about 30 major infrastructure projects in the next 5 years. And we would also be able to increase our funding in our asset management, watershed planning, and flood warning system programs. The next option, which would correspond to a $1.50 rate increase, increases the number of major CIP projects, infrastructure projects over the next 5 years to 45, which is very similar to the level of infrastructure projects we've been constructing over recent years. This would add funding for our asset management watershed planning program. The biggest change to this level of service option is the addition of a stream stabilization program. And what this would do would be take projects that are related to stream stabilization, residents' backyards and so forth, where there is significant erosion and sedimentation occurring, pull those projects out of the DA program, Drainage Assistance Program, where they have not ranked as highly because they're not directly related to public safety. Pull those projects into a new program. It would be approximately 30 projects that are on the current backlog list, and start doing those projects under this new program. That's the main change in that level of service option. The third level of service option would keep the stream stabilization program I just discussed, also add a voluntary flood hazard mitigation program that would provide money for buyouts on a voluntary basis of properties located in the floodplain. And that is related to the floodplain management changes that we are in the process of making at the council's request. Another addition under this level of service would be to add a pool for green stormwater infrastructure that would help fund those types of projects on other city projects to help make those projects more sustainable and more resilient with regards to their stormwater impacts. So pulling that capital improvements program out just by itself now, It makes it a little easier to see the different levels of service as compared to past years. So the $4.5 million is no rate increase, and you can see level of service 1, 2, and 3 relative to past years of this program. Here's how those proposed fee increases would compare to other peer cities, both in North Carolina as well as other capital cities within the Southeast U.S. We are currently at $5. Level 1 increase would go to $5.50. Level 2 would go to $6.50. Level 3 would go to $8. All of these still remain within somewhat of a centroid of our peer cities with proactive stormwater programs. So to summarize, we do appreciate the support that we've received from City Council in the past, and we look forward to providing the level of service that you see as best for our community, and we'll do so as best possible. We appreciate your support and would be glad to answer any questions at this point in time.
Can you hear me now? Okay, I had been, I guess, muted. Councillor Cox has a question. Anybody else with their hand raised? Then Councillor Knight. So we'll start with Councillor Cox, please.
I guess this would be a question for the manager. What would be our options for using transferring money from other places in the budget to cover these costs as opposed to increasing rates?
Sure. Well, the council could certainly identify funds that are general dollars to go to stormwater towards stormwater. You just can't use the fee for the stormwater fee going out. So if you wanted to use general dollars to support the enterprise in stormwater, you certainly could. That would be a change in policy, but that's certainly within the prerogative of the council.
And those are basically like reserve funds that we have, general capital reserve funds, or is that what you're referring to?
Well, no, I wasn't referring to a specific fund. What I was just saying is the general fund or general tax dollars are your most flexible use of funds.
Okay.
So, but you couldn't use
a capital reserve. Do we have a capital reserve?
You do. You do. So you have. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
How much is in there?
For this year, you have a remaining balance of about $4.4 million. That's your policy above 14% that is available for one-time or critical capital projects. So again, the important element of capital reserve is that it would be for capital projects as opposed to operating.
And if we went below the 14%, what are the impacts of going below 14%?
So the 14% fund balance policy for the general fund is one of your key indicators for the AAA bond ratings that we have with the 3 rating agencies. And the council establishes that as your reserve for emergencies and for a resiliency against economic conditions, as well as cash flow that's used to help manage the general fund throughout the year, because a lot of our revenue is property tax, which is paid at one particular point in the year. So if the council were to choose to reduce your 14% fund balance policy, you would probably want to receive a report from Allison Bradshaw, our chief financial officer, about what the potential impacts might be to the rating agencies. And generally, they frown upon that unless there's some specific, very extreme set of circumstances, usually.
And do the agencies set 14%, or do they set something a little bit lower than 14%?
No, 14% is set by the city, but when you go to a rating agency, when they rate your debt or when they review your financial conditions, it's kind of like your proposal of how you're going to remain financially resilient and financially strong in your financial policies. And so there's multiple criteria, multiple indicators, multiple measures of that. And ours is 14%. If you were to benchmark the 14%, some have higher, some have lower. It depends on how we would say to the rating agencies, how are we going to be resilient?
And that 14% represents how much money?
I'd have to throw that to Allison or Mary off the top of my head. So it's 14% generally of about a $500-something million budget, but then there's some other numbers in there. So I don't know the number off the top of my head.
Okay, so it would be easily $60 million.
It's probably 60 or 70 something million dollars in that range.
Okay.
Okay, Councilor Knight.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Wayne, your slide is about fourth from the end. What does each level provide? I'd missed this before, but so option 3 was initially endorsed by SMAC, and did they come back and unendorse it after COVID, the pandemic hit, the crisis hit, or is that endorsement still in place, just that the fact it is pre-COVID?
Yes, sir. That was the level that was endorsed by SMAC. But no, they did not unendorse it. They have not met again since the COVID-19 impact. And so we're not able to reconsider their recommendation based on that. So it was a staff recommendation to back off of that level of service.
Okay.
Councilor Stewart.
Thank you. Wayne, thanks so much for this additional information. I know the request came from Mayor Pro Tem Branch, but I think it was in an attempt to help some of us who wanted further information. So thank you. One of the questions I have is about what happens if we do a smaller incremental increase? So 50 cents this year, 50 cents next year, or 50 cents in a couple of years, as opposed to a bigger $3 right now. Is there a big, how does that impact what y'all can do programmatically?
Yes, good question. So in all of our recommendations, we do have small incremental or proposals, small incremental increases in future years as well. When we look out at our 5 and 10-year CIP, we do need to build into rate model some assumptions as to what those requests would be. So the way we made those assumptions, with no increase, the future years would require a slightly larger percent increase moving forward. A larger increase now could be offset by smaller increases in the future. So in our assumptions, we looked at over a 10-year period trying to achieve somewhat similar objectives by the end of that period, but the larger increase does provide a higher level of service over the entire 10-year.
Councilor Martin.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and thank you, Wayne, for this. A question that you may have addressed at the very beginning and perhaps I missed or was in a subsequent presentation. Can you give us a dollar figure in terms of the total amount that is visually sort of represented in terms of years in regards to the backlog that you mentioned? What are we talking about? What's the monetary value of the backlog that's represented in terms of maintenance?
Yeah, so the backlog was a graph that I presented at the last presentation, and the current backlog is approximately $16 million in projects. And when we say backlog, that amount has been specifically allocated for projects that just have not yet been bid or under construction yet. So they are specific projects in the CIP. and we are continuing to move forward on those projects. This rate level of service option would affect additional projects moving forward that we could add to that capital improvements program.
Okay, thank you.
Councilor Branch.
Thank you for the information. I noticed in option 1, the backlog is 75 plus years. If we did nothing, what type of, is it just, what's that number of backlog duration?
Yes. So I believe Mayor Pro Tem Branch, the number you're referring to is really the amount of projects that we've identified that are unfunded as of yet. And that number, and I apologize, Councilmember Martin, if that's what you'd intended, I misunderstood your question. That number is roughly $500 million. Those are projects that we have done planning studies and have been recommended, identified, including drainage projects, flood-proofing projects, stream restoration projects, and other water quality projects that have been identified but not funded as of now. So the number you're referring to, the 75 years with a 50-cent rate increase, that's about how long it would take us to be able to accomplish all of those projects that we're aware of. With no rate increase, that number would increase to over 100 years.
And also of, wow, okay. Yeah, when you gave me that number, that just changed my whole train of thought right now. In today's climate and seeing everything, I'm leaning towards the 50-cent piece. Doing something, I think, is the best option other than doing nothing. Doing nothing, no rate increase is an option, but with the situation we're in, and when we have major storms and things of natural disasters, my district feels it the most. So for me to sit here and say, you know, I would love to do option 3, but option 3 is not, I believe, financially reasonable for our community at this time. So I would like to make a motion that council adopts and approves option 1 of the stormwater presentation of a 50-cent rate increase.
Do we have a second?
I'll second it.
Okay, motion by Councilor Branch and seconded by Councilor Knight. Remember, we vote by raising our hands. All in favor? Is anyone opposed? So Councilor Cox is opposed, the rest in favor. Clerk. Okay. Councilor Martin.
Thank you, and I'll be brief. Thank you, Councilor Branch, for leading on this and getting this to us. And Wayne, I think that moving forward, I'd love to investigate ways that we can be more bold in our approach to this. I think the more that we use the term incremental, the further away this gets from us and the more expensive it gets. And that's not on you. That's not a criticism of you, but as council, we're in a moment, obviously, financially, we can only do so much and the community can only support so much. And I think that this is the best that we can do at this moment. But I would be interested in exploring the way with council in the months ahead. We've got our hands full now, but being creative about how we can try and get rid of the $500 million gap that we have right now, because that's only going to get worse. I mean, when we think about the climate change impacts that we have and flooding increases, and to Councilmember Branch's point, I mean, our most impoverished communities in all of our districts tend to see the worst impacts of flooding and climate change, regardless of what district they're in. So would love to really think critically about how we build climate resiliency in the city. And I think that this is a really huge part of that. So glad to support this today, but would really like to kind of bring this topic back up at a later date. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you, Councilor Branch. Next item we have are the budget notes that were requested by City Council. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go through each note, and I'm going to ask if anybody would like to have a discussion on that particular note. It's going to be really important. Raise your hand. Let me see that. If there is no interest in pursuing that, we won't have a presentation. So the first item is traffic enforcement unit structure, staffing, and expansion, which have been brought forward by Councilor Cox. Councilor Cox?
Yes, I put that forward largely because of concerns in my district about traffic control, about speeding in neighborhoods, people driving 50 miles an hour in 30-mile-an-hour zones. However, because of the situation this year, the economic situation, I'm going to withdraw that. I think it's something that we do need to pursue, but I think it will have to wait until next year's budget in order to pursue it.
Okay, thank you. Next, we have budget note 2, the Raleigh digital connectors. That was Councilor Branch.
Yeah, I would like to discuss this one, but I want to see if there are any others first. I want to see if there's any other notes that we want to discuss first before this one is discussed.
Yep. I think I've said this many times, but this is my favorite program that the city does, and it's a game changer. So, okay, we'll take a look at that after. The budget note 3 was recommendations from the Mayor's Committee for Persons with Disabilities annual report. This was actually brought forward by former Mayor McFarland, and it's about a $4,000 expenditure. What I would like to ask staff to do, if there's concurrence with this, this committee has not met. Can we go back to them and find out if they still have the need for additional funding for scholarships? And if so, take a look at, I think we have about $3,000 left in council contingency. Perhaps we could use that to fund that this year. So if staff could come back and inform us as to where we stand on this and where the committee stands, I think that could be helpful. Do we have concurrence on that? Okay, thank you. All right, budget note 4 is Go Raleigh Access. That was brought forward by Councilor Martin.
I would like to discuss this. There's just one particular part that I talked about with staff that might be of interest to council. So happy to bring that forward quickly at the right time.
Okay, let's go through all of this and then see where we are. All right. Rental rates for North Carolina Theater at the Performing Arts Center. I brought that up and I would like to have a discussion on that. Next is the expansion of the Raleigh Police Department's personalized police vehicle program. That was brought forward by Councilor Buffkin.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. I've found the information in the budget note to be quite helpful. This is an expensive item, and in light of our financial situation, I think there's going to be opportunities to discuss this in the future that may lead to a productive result. And so at this time, I'd like to withdraw that budget note for the purposes of this current budget discussion.
Okay, in budget note 8, Councilor Buffkin, you also brought forward regarding the moving toward digital publications and documents.
Yes, Mayor, and likewise here, I'd like to withdraw this budget note. The information was helpful. What I think would be most helpful for council now is to get a better sense of when we print all these documents, how useful are they and how many are going to the recycle bin? There's equity issues here for people that don't have access to the internet. So I don't know that our community is ready to go all digital, but it's been a very helpful piece of information to receive. But I'm also ready to withdraw this budget note at this time.
Okay, so Mary, what we will have, I guess, a brief presentation on is the Raleigh Digital Connectors first, Go Raleigh Access second, and then rental rates for North Carolina Theater.
So it's the information that is provided in the agenda item. We have staff here that can answer any questions you may have, but we do not have any formal presentations for these items. They're here for discussion of council or we're here to answer any questions you may have.
So, Madam Mayor, so I have a question. As I look at the information, it talks about the $500 that each recipient receives when they graduate, the laptop and other incentives, but it really doesn't give a cost of the program unless I missed it in reading this.
No, and Linda Jones is here, can talk about it more. The budget note actually didn't give you any options for future considerations because of where the program is for fiscal year 20. So I'll have Linda explain that a little better.
Good afternoon, Mayor and members of the council. I'm sorry. Good afternoon, Mayor and members of council. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, great. In regards to the budget, I had submitted a budget, and again, we did take that out. What we're facing this particular year in mid-COVID is currently the program is housed in the Pathway Center Computer Lab, which holds 15 students. Well, if we have a second program, that means that we have to look at doubling everything. Staff, also looking at another computer lab, possibly where that will take place, how we will have to outfit that particular computer lab. And so those costs actually really can add up real quickly.
Okay, so this is what I'm thinking, Madam Mayor. Can we put this on hold for this year, but going into the upcoming year, have staff go back and look at space in order to increase the number of students per cycle, and also look into partnerships to see what other businesses may be out there that may be able to either offer space or financial assistance. This program there's so many people, young people that come through this, and it's probably, one of our most diverse programs we have. I've been to the majority of all the graduations since I've been on council. And to see these young people and their parents, get the joy that they feel. Some of them may be the only one in the house that understand. So for some of the kids, English is a second language, and they're coming through digital connectors and getting something out that they can go back and help them grow and get a good, meaningful job, as well as they give back to our elderly, our seniors. They go and they volunteer and they sit with our seniors and help them understand computers for those that may find it a little challenging. So this is a way for us to give back into our community. So we need the numbers, the costs, and so I'm going to go ahead and preempt next year's budget and ask for the budget note for next year on the Digital Connectors program so that we can grow this program and move it forward in our community.
All right. Thank you so kindly. We will do that.
Thank you. As I said, Councilor Branch, we have had the digital connectors to all of the Raleigh Innovation Summits. They are so impressive. And what you can also see is the confidence that they develop through participation in this program. So I wish we could do something this year, but it is complicated. But I think we should definitely consider this a top priority for next year. Okay, the next is the Go Raleigh Access. Councilor Martin.
Sure. So I brought this up after having meetings with members of the community that use our paratransit system. And I think what is brought this up pre-COVID, and obviously we're not in a place financially at this point to take our entire paratransit system fee-free. But what I do believe to be potentially possible, and what I would like for Mary to speak to and for others to ask questions on, is for us to take to potentially utilize our federal CARES Act dollars as outlined in this budget note to help alleviate the fees incurred by individuals that, over the age of 65 that use our paratransit system. For many of you that know, there are a lot of folks that use the paratransit system that are over the age of 65 that are cost burdened. And even before COVID, when I was meeting with them, there was a lot of concern and fear about their finances with the impending tax implications of the Wake County increases. And that was before COVID. And so I think that what we could do with Federal CARES Act funding is allow a year of alleviation while we also take a look at what a system could look like of taking a step back and looking at fee-free for that system overall, and giving them just a moment of relief. Mary, that I think if you could just speak to what the Federal CARES Act funding is already allocated for the transportation department, and what may need to be moved around potentially. And then if other members have questions in particular, that was just my hope out of this when I got the memo back. That'd be helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember. I'm actually going to have David Eatman come up and give an update on what we can use the CARES Act funding for and what we would not do if we funded this through that process.
So good afternoon, David Eatman, Transportation. The CARES Act funds, so just for clarification, I think the request was for fare-free for 65 and older for the paratransit. So currently under paratransit program, we do not delineate by age as far as eligibility. So we would have to go back through that program and determine that eligibility. We do have date of birth, so I'm not saying that would be difficult, but that would be a starter. And certainly we outlined what we saw within that age stratification within the memo. But the CARES Act can't be used to supplement revenue, but it can be used to fund our net deficit. So if you don't have revenue, then you have a higher net deficit. So it could be used in that regard.
I have a follow-up question, David.
Yes.
So is this money that we are seeking through the county for CARES Act funding?
This was actually a direct allocation from the Federal Transit Administration. So this was about $23.5 million directly through FTA. And it was actually a larger allocation to the MPO, and that was the City of Raleigh's allocation.
Okay, thank you.
So,
Councilor Branch?
So, David, if I'm hearing correctly, the CARES Act would only cover the $660,000. Because you said it would only cover loss?
So it would cover the total loss of the program. So the CARES Act basically states in the legislation, again, you can't use it for direct revenue, but by loss of revenue related to the CARES Act, whether that may be a loss of local, state, or fares, once you calculate your net deficit, then it can be used to make you whole. So that's how we would actually calculate that. I know that that's more of a budgeting issue than an actual use issue. It's just the way we have to classify the funds to use them correctly. So at the end of the day, if we generally were short $500,000 in revenue and that reflected in our net deficit, that would be eligible.
Okay, so that means we're covering our loss. How does this, to go to Councilor Martin's request of fare free, how would that impact fare rate using that COVAC money to cover loss?
So again, if we were to come up with the policy that for a certain period of time that you wanted to remain fare free, we could certainly implement that. We're fare free currently for not just 65 and older, but currently we're fare free for everyone on the fixed route as well as the paratransit system. We don't really have a date yet of when we will start charging fares. And so that's a very big unknown. Many things have to occur for us to reach that level of some returning to a state where we can charge fares. We're tracking that, and we'll have more information in the future. So that's kind of step one, is we already fare free across the board. This is assuming that once you do go to starting a collection of fares, that we would, go to a 65 and older fare free for the paratransit program. Again, the CARES Act funds, they have been requested to be used as soon as possible. We don't have an actual deadline within the legislation, so we could use these for a period of time. Currently, we're projecting to use these funds and to cover losses for FY20, this fiscal year, and we're projecting forward in 21 and 22 because we have a lot of unknowns associated with outside revenue sources. While we probably have a fairly amount of unknowns regarding our own revenue sources, quite honestly, but we also have state and other federal sources that we must depend upon to operate not only the paratransit, but the fixed route. And we're also making sure that we move forward. We have talked to council about many of our capital initiatives as well. So I'm not saying that there's not flexibility within that, but that's basically how we were planning to roll this forward. And use the CARES Act funding.
And my last question, after the CARES Act fund is used for whatever reason, after 1 year, our only options to cover this cost is to pull from general fund and to look at property tax? Are those the only two options? In order, because right now the CARES Act fund is only good for 1 year. So after that, what are our options?
So I would say that the CARES Act funds are good for more than a year. We certainly have those funds allocated through FY22, but we project those to be depleted by FY22. So if you make a policy change, you are looking at something long-term that will be a dedicated source at some point. So granted, whether that's 12 months or whether that's 24 months, you still need to think about what is that dedicated source. As far as items outside of a fare box, what could cover a fare box revenue? Generally, we would be looking for something outside of federal funds because we're limited what our federal funds can be used for. We couldn't use that to bring into operating. We are capped under certain circumstances how much money we can bring over, and we're reaching that cap. So beyond that, I don't have a good explanation for where those additional funds could be derived from.
Councillor Cox?
Yes, I guess I'm confused. We're currently fare free is what I think I heard you say.
Yes, sir.
Okay. So if we're currently fare free, at some point in the future, we're going to go to charging a fare. Is that what I also heard you say?
Yes, sir.
So what is the current plan for doing that?
When will we return to a regular fare system?
Yes.
And start charging fares?
Yes.
So right now we have a number of mitigating factors to promote safety on the buses. We currently have rear door boarding. So obviously when you board from the rear, the fare box is at the front. And it's not very convenient to pay a fare. That also provides separation between the passengers and the driver. We have separation already on the vehicles, so we have limited seating on the vehicles that are currently on the road to promote that social distancing on the buses.
Okay,
at some point,
we're currently fare free because of social distancing. Is that right?
Yes, sir. That is correct.
All right. I didn't understand. Okay, thank you.
My apologies. I could have cut to the chase there.
Councillor Buffkin and then Councillor Martin.
Well, thank you, Mayor. This has been very helpful, Mr. Eatman. Appreciate your presentation and information today. It's my impression with all this uncertainty about our transportation revenue and our other revenue, this idea may just be premature at this time. It's just my sense. Maybe we ought to wait and see how things settle out.
Councillor Martin and then Councillor Cox.
Councillor Cox can go, and then I can follow.
I think Councillor Buffkin raises an excellent point. Do we have to make this decision today? Can we decide to use the CARES money at the point at which we would normally restart charging fares?
Yes. Again, to pay that net deficit that is resulting from a lack of fare revenue. Again, we don't have the date yet for when we will return to a regular fare collection process. That's for paratransit or fixed route. We hope that it won't be too far in the future, but at this point, many unknowns.
Okay, thank you.
And could that be the sorry, go ahead.
Councillor Martin?
I think Councillor Cox and I were going to say the same thing, that perhaps that be the request for this specific budget note, that I think that we need more information from staff about how this could be implemented when that would be when this specific program would be reinstated and fares would be reinstated. More importantly, many of the folks that ride paratransit are at greater risk of contracting COVID. And so as we are looking at wave 2 and 3, we have to be cognizant of a system that is already burdened and trying to meet the demand of ridership, and is expensive for our riders, and now is burdened with trying to socially distance and get them safely to and from work if they still have work, and safely to and from doctor's appointments, et cetera. And so I want to make sure that we're making a fiscally sound decision, but I also want to make a decision that helps our folks sleep better at night. And I think that there are a lot of folks that are struggling. So if it's possible for us to bring this budget note back before that decision is made, that would be helpful. But thank you.
City Manager?
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Mayor and Council. I just wanted to validate Councilmember Martin and Councilmember Cox's question. I think that's very appropriate to bring that back in the context of the COVID situation, and the CARES Act money is not budget adopted dependent. Just as a reminder, we're in this phase 2 right now, which has some broad definitions, and we went to phase 2 and we went back to our regular bus route service for the most part, but we didn't institute the fares because of the social distancing and the rear boarding. So that's our kind of current position. And then the decision to go to the phase 3 overall, which captures a lot of different services, including transit. Transit is one critical one, but there are others as well. That determination needs to be made consistent with the COVID pandemic kind of situation. So I think at that point, you can figure out how the CARES Act money has the impact of the service of the COVID. Now, then going forward, a longer term question about fare reductions for post 65 and paratransit when you're past the COVID situation is a different policy question, but that could be then answered, at the time. Now, you will maybe get caught later if you want to have the second half of the year free over 65, and we've applied the CARES Act money under the definition that's appropriate. So I don't want you to think that that's not potentially a budget issue, but I think it's probably difficult to make that determination right now. But if you want to go fare-free post 65 after CARES Act money is eligible, that will be a future budget issue. But we're kind of in it for a little bit here, so we'll see.
Councillor Cox?
Yeah, I just want to say that I do support waiting a little bit to get more information, but I do support the idea of using the money to help those who are 65 and older. We do have to do that, I think.
So the consensus that I've heard is that we wait, that it might be premature to make a decision on this at this point, but that we ask the staff to bring this back to us at the appropriate time. All right? We good? Okay, I'm seeing a lot of head nodding.
Thank you.
So I'm assuming good. All right, thank you. The next item regarding the rental fee waivers, I just wanted to kind of tell you a little bit of, give you a little background on this. I've been approached by a number of our resident companies and community arts groups who are really concerned that they won't make it through this crisis. They are all dealing with budget issues. They don't even know if they're going to be able to put on performances this year, but they certainly can't afford it to pay the rental fee. They had asked for relief. So what I'm going to suggest is that we waive the rental fees for all resident companies and community arts groups this year only, 1 year only. That cost is $308,590, and use general capital reserve funding to cover that cost. You can only use capital reserve funding for a one-time cost. This isn't something you can use recurring. So this would be contingent on a 1 year, relief. So I'm going to make that motion. Councillor Cox?
Yeah, just a quick question. I support that, but I do want to ask, we do have a certain amount of money set aside for public art for all capital projects that we build. And I was wondering how much money is sitting in that budget, in that fund.
So we would have to bring that number back to you because it accrues and then it's spent as projects are completed. We would also need direction from City Council on that because that is a council adopted policy, but we'll get that amount to you. I don't know that off the top of my head.
I just want to present that as an alternative to using the reserves. That's all.
Can you say that again, Councillor Cox?
Well, we set aside, I think, what is it, 1% for every major project we build is set aside for public art. So
yes, sir.
We have money set aside for public art, and considering this is related to the arts, this might be a good source of revenue to use for this purpose.
Okay, so we have money that is set aside for public art, and that funding is more than 1%. That is
I forget exactly what it is.
That's the grant program.
Well, so there's a couple arts. There's an arts per capita, which is allocated every year through the Arts Commission, and that's been allocated this year, so that doesn't accrue. And then there's the arts that we do with our capital projects, where depending on the capital project, we take a percentage of it to use for public art for those projects. We would need to go actually and look at the funding source associated to make sure it can be used for an ongoing operating expense, depending on where that funding came from. But yes, we can find what that amount is for you.
Hey, I had made a motion to approve this. If Councillor Knight?
I'll second
your motion.
Just to make an amendment is that we look at this other pot of money and go with whichever is available.
Well, I'm not comfortable putting that into the motion. I think if staff understands that they can come back and provide some more information.
That's fine.
Okay. All right. So the motion is it stands. I think we have a fight between Councillor Cox and Councillor Knight over who seconded it.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, Councillor Knight, you seconded this for the clerk. All in favor? Any opposed? No. Okay, clerk, that was unanimously approved. Thank you. And now the next item we have is other items identified by City Council for discussion. I have an item, but I will wait to see if anybody else has an item they would like to have discussed. Okay. Mary, if you could just give us a quick review of the public safety alternative that was brought before us. I know we don't have consensus on this, and we need to have further discussion, but I just want it to be clear what it is that we're even considering. I know that one of the proposals was something that I think I have been advocating for, and Councilor Martin. It's the creation of a unit that would contain social workers and others to help support our homeless community and those with mental health issues. So if we could just get a review of that, I would appreciate it.
Thank you, Mayor. We actually have a couple slides that can walk you through this. We also have a handout, and because we're not sitting at the table, I can't hand it to you, but Lou is going to email it to you so you have it. It's also contained in the budget book if you have that handy, but it's a nice little chart that provides some descriptions. So I'm going to go through, it's about 3 slides about what is included in the public safety proposal in the budget. Just want to begin with what was included with the police request. And you can remember this was all developed coming out of a staffing study that was completed last year, along with our benchmarking where we realized we were behind our peers. In terms of the police request, it totals about $2.8 million. It is 28 positions. To get a little more detail on what it includes several specialized units. One is a new mental health and homelessness unit. It adds 2 civilian social workers and 7 sworn personnel, and to help those that are impacted by mental illness and homelessness, and it assists in connecting them to the appropriate resources in order to enhance their quality of life. Another specialized unit is the new Parks and Greenways Patrol Unit. And as you can see, especially during this time with the growth of our park system, in terms of users, this is a dedicated unit of 6 sworn officers and 1 sergeant to enhance public safety and further promote the use of those natural resources. Another specialized unit is some additional transit patrol officers. And so it adds 4 sworn officers to address the city's growth and calls for service in and around the downtown district and our transit areas. Some additional police needs that are also included. It includes additional support for our training academy. And so this provides 2 sworn and 1 non-sworn personnel, which will assist in facilitating and coordinating training that is relevant to 21st century policing, such as diversity and inclusion, implicit bias, reality-based training, resiliency, and focusing on human development and the guardian mindset. And so as you recall, we're also going to be opening our new state-of-the-art training facility, and so this will be all completed there. Funding is also proposed for our family violence intervention unit support, and this adds a detective to help manage the caseload. The matrix staffing study was very clear in identifying that this area was understaffed. It also includes some software that is needed in that area. It adds 2 additional animal control officers, the proposal does, and it also has some enhancements to our investigative area in terms of 2 sworn personnel that will help fulfill body-worn camera requests and investigate minor complaints. For the fire department, the total is $2.4 million. It represents 20 positions. It allocates 2 positions for our fire marshals as they continue to perform occupancy inspections and new construction development. And as we've seen historically, that's been growing. There is a position associated for public fire and life safety programs. in order to increase exposure of the fire and life concerns in our community for the public. There is also 2 positions associated with training staff, and this actually enables us to free up more fire personnel for the front lines. And so this provides additional staff to teach at our academies and continuing education of existing staff. And so this helps minimize the impact on our operations division. And the largest request is an additional ladder company, and you can see that is 15 personnel, and it also includes the long-term cost associated with the ladder. And so this helps us in terms of our ladder coverage gap and provides us with some additional capacity, especially as we get additional high rises downtown and in other areas. And so as you can see, the total request is about $5.2 million, represents 0.69 cents, includes 48 new positions, and as it was mentioned, this was not included in the proposed fiscal year 21 budget. And so I can take any questions that council may have.
Just a request that you place this information on board docs because it's not there.
Yeah.
Yes, sir, we will.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you. Our next item is, budget ordinances and resolutions. I don't think any of us are prepared to vote on the budget today, but if, Mary, if you would want to run through what the process is, we have some new counselors. Excuse me, City Manager.
Yeah, sorry to interrupt. Mary, I'll take this one really just for the sake of perhaps the new members. What you have in the packet, and certainly it's up to the council about when you might choose to adopt the budget, but I think it's reasonable, or that there was no expectation of that today, but there is a lot of financial and technical ordinance work that goes into a budget that's over $1 billion. And we have, in governmental accounting, there's a lot of funds. You have fund transfers and movements and things like that. So the benefit of what you did today is you voted on, I'll just call them budget amendments. It's kind of like when you go through a legislative process and you're voting for amendments. That allows now the staff to go take those amendments and build them into the document, build them into the ordinances. So we're being, what you get today is sort of the packet of what it looks like and the transparency of it. You can look through it. You'll get a revised packet every work session that you take potentially to adopt the budget. And even at the work session next week, you can actually adopt, particularly if it's a piece of paper that shows that it balances an amendment, and we can update the ordinance later. The attorney's always been pretty good about that, assuming that the motion that you make balances, revenues equal to expenditures kind of thing. But there's a lot of information and amendments and ordinances in there. We just wanted you to have a chance to see it before maybe you got to the point where you're ready to adopt it and had not absorbed it. So rather than go through it today, Mayor, what I would say is just have council members look at it, and if you have follow-up questions, we'll take care of that.
Okay, that sounds reasonable. Okay, we have gone through today's agenda for the work session. Just a reminder that we have a work session tomorrow at 4 o'clock. We have also added to that work session agenda follow-up on the city manager's memo from today. And we will then. And then we will have a work session on the budget next week on the 15th. And if you have any questions between now and then, please contact staff, and we will see everyone tomorrow. Meeting is adjourned. Thank you.